Nós teríamos agora, então, uns 20 minutos de questionamentos aos três palestrantes anteriores.
A gente viu aqui exemplos magníficos de trabalhando com a natureza. Eu acho que esse realmente é o caminho, mas eu acho que o Brasil ainda tem problemas fundamentais, básicos, relativos à parte de dragagem. Então, a minha pergunta é para todos, pode ser para o Dr. Joey Galliani, pode ser para o Han, pode ser para... Todos os três, pode ser. Bom, how much can we minimize the dredging impacts, the dredging process itself, regarding the formation of fluid mud, high density turbidited flows, in overflowing over dredges? I think that's a main problem for the Brazilian harbors nowadays. And also, which are the effective fine sediments tracers nowadays that you can use to check the stability of the dumping sites?
The question I think was for half the free.
Well, the point of the question on dredged spoil, as it's called, or the turbidity and let's say the overflow of sediments fines, I think that can be solved to a large extent by measures on board the ship. They have been designed at this very moment. They are being used at this very moment. And I also like the way, which I described in the project in Singapore, where you start from the impacted area rather than from the production on the ship. So how much can the environment have? And tune your operations in such a way that the environment is not harmed. So you can determine the sensitivity of the ecosystem. Determine how much turbidity the ecosystem can have. And then tune the dredging operations. So then you minimize the impact. What you do with polluted sediment is a quite different story. So that's the disposal question. And yeah, as long as it's polluted, it's polluted, and you have to put it somewhere, and you have to isolate it from the environment. And I don't see a way around that. You simply have to do that. So if the sediment is clean, you can do all sorts of creative things with it, as Joe described. But if it's polluted, you have to isolate it from the environment or clean it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any criteria for select dredge types? There is some pattern that is accepted in other countries, like how you select a dredge. This one is good. Can you select that for your experience? Because we don't know here in Brazil how you can select a dredge for that work. Is the right how you control the overflow? In the density of the overflow, what's the key point to stop in order to not increase the high bottom turbidity flows or the production of fluid mud? Can you track the fluid mud at the same time that the dredging is operating? And I think those are key questions for, at least for some areas, some estuaries, in coastal lagoons areas especially. Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm afraid I'm not the person to answer this. This is a question that could best be answered by dredging firms, I think. They know how it works, and they know the criteria very well, because they have to acquire projects, right?
Mais alguma pergunta?
I have a question to Professor Velinka. Okay, your presentation, you said a lot about long-term planning, okay, and goals. I was curious to know how much political interference are there in the ports that belong to the association or to those two associations that you mentioned. Again, I'm not really sure of what happens in here, but I believe that there is a very constant change in perspective from election year or from election term to election term in ports in Brazil, and I don't know how much that would prohibit long-term goals and objectives to be attained.
I like to answer this question from our own experience in Port of Rotterdam. We were a municipal port, quite political, with not political nominations, but more or less almost, with a lot of political interference. We decided we want port expansions, we want to be able to cooperate with other ports, we want to be able to invest in foreign countries for port development in order to be better for our own port. But the first step was to get more autonomy. So we started up this privatization to become a private port with public shareholders. And it took many years, but in the end, even the Dutch government took a share in the Port of Rotterdam. So now we have two main shareholders, the City of Rotterdam for 2/3, the government for 1/3, but they're further apart from the port. We have a board of commissioners which has private industry in it. We have a lot of maneuverability within the port to invest even in foreign countries, which would have been very difficult when we would have this political organization right in our back. So, and studies showed after years that the port became even more profitable after this privatization as a public entity. And I think still that's very important to be able to operate and to operate as well on the long term. Because now the Board of Commissioners is responsible for nominating the President of the Port, and the President of the Port is not a political nomination. It will stay for longer, and we can work from long term. We work with business cases. So I think it's even better for the port to be privatized that way, because you cannot lean on the government when you have a loss. You have to pay your own expenses. You have to do it at your own expenses. So when we developed this Maasvlakte 2, the new port development, I will have a presentation on Friday on it for 3 billion euros. The port gets some money from the government as a loan and used the share of the government in the port to pay the new port development, but it's at our own expense and risk. And it meant that we made a business case for that. And we were very keen on having first clients that had a good business plan and that we could invest for them in the new port to face our investments, to face our reclamation. So I think in the end we're much better off that way. But it starts with becoming privatized, maybe as a public entity, to be a little bit away from the political steering. Is that an answer? Okay, thank you.
Another question on the same line. Dr. Isaura talked about the judicialization that is taken to court of cases that involve the environment. Do you have this type of thing in the Netherlands?
Very much so, certainly in the past. This big project, again, I like to talk from our own experience. We lost the court case and had about 1.5 year delay in planning, and so then as a port we took the lead. We said we're not gonna trust on the legal side anymore completely. We are gonna attract and negotiate with all the stakeholders. So we negotiated with the people that were opposing the fisheries and the nature conservation, and we made agreements with them on what we would do beyond legislation to restore environment, to enhance green fishing, to make new recreation facilities. So we made agreements that they would agree and they would not oppose us legally. Of course, it did cost some money, but it reduced the risk enormous. And nowadays we think it was a much better way to go, because you incorporate stakeholders, they are involved in the planning, and you create value for them instead of that you destroy value for them. And in the end it may cost a little bit more money, but there are more people ready to pay for it as well. So the way to go forward was to beyond legislation, negotiate and agree with stakeholders. And in fact, down to earth, that they would not start a process again when the new permit would arise.
Sounds reasonable. Thank you, Professor.
Ana Elisa, da Universidade Federal Fluminense. Eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta para a doutora Isaura Fraga. Eu gostaria de saber, no Rio de Janeiro especificamente, por que se na CONAMA 454 estão previstos alguns usos benéficos do sedimento dragado, por que existem tão poucos projetos ainda de uso benéfico de sedimento dragado? Tirando a experiência do CDF na Baía de Sepetiba, né, do projeto da Companhia Siderúrgica do Atlântico, na Baía de Guanabara, especificamente, nós só temos projetos para disposição de bota-fora oceânico e não para bota-fora estuarino.
Anelisa, essa é uma pergunta que também a gente sempre se fez dentro do órgão ambiental, e uma das questões que eu vejo dessa a dificuldade do empreendedor de querer compartilhar riscos. Então, quando ele propõe, por exemplo, que ele vai fazer engordamento de praias, ou que ele vai fazer algum outro uso que possa ter acoplado a isso um risco ou para a saúde da população, ou acoplado que ele não tenha garantias, que nunca mais ele vai ter problemas de ter colocado ali aquele sedimento, eles têm muito medo de propor soluções mais arrojadas por conta dessa responsabilização solidária por essa atividade. Nós temos discutido muito isso dentro do órgão ambiental, de como dar uma garantia que, a partir do momento que o órgão ambiental também concorda com esse tipo de atividade, ele absorve um pouco essa responsabilidade. Aí também tem o lado dos técnicos, né, da dificuldade dos técnicos assumirem também, porque é uma responsabilidade criminal quase. Então, essa é uma questão que a gente tem que avançar. Em vários países do mundo já se tem o uso, e acho que a CONAMA ela avançou nesse ponto, exatamente porque isso não é feito em quase nenhum estado, mas ela já pensando num avanço dessa legislação, já propôs isso, e nós temos que ter um pouco dessa garantia de que quando ele draga e vai colocar esse rejeito numa praia, amanhã ele não possa ser responsabilizado porque alguém disse que teve uma hepatite, ou outro disse que teve uma doença de pele. Como é que a gente um pouco isola essa responsabilidade solidária? Então, sempre quando é uma iniciativa privada, de um porto privado, eles têm muito medo de propor soluções mais arrojadas.
Okay, Professor Ian Townend has the word.
Thank you. really wanted to follow up on the previous point about this business of stakeholder engagement versus going to law, and reflecting on similar experiences in the UK of the benefits of trying to get stakeholders to agree rather than ending up in a court case. And this comes through from not simply that it's easier and it costs less money in the end, and you often get a better solution, but also from the fact of what is evidence or what is science. And I was slightly concerned about the suggestion that you should get a bunch of scientists together and get them to agree, because that is never going to happen. And I think the value of the science or the evidence is that it provides not the answer. It will never be the answer. What it can be is the basis for a negotiation and the basis for a better informed negotiation with all the different stakeholders. And I think looking for a mechanism to put that in place is what might help your particular situation.
Thank you.